Okay, I'm going to walk you through assignment 13 here on interface segregation to see if we can have it make some sense and you learn something from it. It gets kind of complicated jumping into these complicated code projects. So I'll try to explain and walk you through what we're doing and what we're trying to learn with this. So you should open up this textbook example. I've modified it slightly for this, but it's largely the example right from the book here. Um, so when you open it up, the main project creates an order controller. It creates a separate what's a separate services order one, a single service one, and a generic services one. So these are all types of order controllers or controllers of some sort. Of different types, and we have methods out here. So let's see if we can understand what this is doing. Um, so here's our main program, and inside that we have this order controller, and we have two options for that. An order controller, one we have where we specify the what we're going to use for reading, saving, and deleting here. And then So again, this is the order controller, and we specify those three things. And so when we save those inside the class here, and so when we have these different methods like create order or get single order, and when we do those, we will call parts of it. So like if we want to create an order, um, we'll use the save. We'll pass in a new order that we want to create. Order means save this order to the database, and we're given a new order. So we'll use the saver that was passed in. So we passed in an order saver. We saved this into a local variable called saver here, and we'll use that later on when we call create order to save the order to the database. Um, Similarly, like delete order, we'll pass in when we instantiate this. Will be the constructor will pass in an order deleter, and we'll say that into this local variable deleter, and we'll save it as an object and implements this interface on orders, iDelete interface. And so later on, when we're using this order controller and we're calling the delete method, saying delete this order, we will then use that order deleter we saved from earlier, and we'll call it delete method here. And I've added some write line statements just to kind of print out and help track where we're at in here. So we have an order controller here. And so we'll use that in two different ways in the main program. If you look at the main program, this create separate services, create single services, those methods are actually inside the main program. If I scroll down here, create separate services and create single services are here, and they both return an order controller, but we're going to do it in two different ways. One way is we're going to create a separate reader, saver, and deleter, three different objects, and we're going to pass those three different objects to this to the order creator and say, okay, use this for reading, this for saving, and this for deleting. So that's why we call it create separate services. Create a single service creates a single CRUD service that does all of these things. And then when we call our order controller, we can just say use the CRUD for reading, use the CRUD for saving, and use the CRUD for deleting. It implements all these interfaces, and so you can reuse it. So this is creating a single service for an order. Now these readers, savers, and deleters, they're in the CRUD implementation folder. So like for example, saver implements the iSave interface, and it actually does nothing other than say saver save. We're saving this entity. We just there's no database code in here actually to do the saving. We're just simulating it. Similarly, reader does similar. Deleter just says I'm deleting this and implements the iDelete interface. Now the more complicated one, the CRUD interface, implements all three interfaces, so it has to have all these methods. It has a read one, a read all, save, and a delete interface. But it'll say it's in CRUD delete rather than like the other one this deleter would say I'm in deleter delete. So it just prints out which one it's using. So we just added these print statements to help us track what's happening as we go through this. So that's so we can create an order controller either by creating separate services or a single service, so it'll be slightly different. We can also create a generic service here and do that. So here's how we create a generic service. We use the generic service and we just specify order in here. And set this up, and we'll look at using the same sort of interface to create a different type, not just orders, but read and write something else. That's one of the benefits of a generic controller. So again, we can use our saver, our deleter, and our our objects for that. Now, we didn't mention this, but the implementations here, like the saver that we looked at earlier, doesn't actually work with orders. Works with some generic object type called a, we're using T entity here. The textbook likes this. Again, you often see this just abbreviated for T for template. So it can work for any type we pass in here inside the greater than less than. So when we are in our main program, when we create an order, a reader, or deleter, we can say use it with orders here. So, and that's what we were doing before. We just didn't mention it. We're creating these generic objects for orders in all of these examples. But it really adds power when we do it in this generic example, and we'll see that in a little bit. Now, it is hard to instantiate an object here. Here we're just able to say like order controller and do this. It's a little more complicated when we have a generic order controller. Let's just look at that. So our generic order controller implements these entities, does our create and stuff, but everywhere everything is generic using these T entities, these generic types throughout. And it gets a little complicated to set this up, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on how this works. In fact, your example in your textbook never actually shows this. They can't figure out, the author never had that in any of their code. So I was able to look up online the proper way to do this using something called reflection. And reflection lets us grab an object and looks at what type that object is, and then use that to help create the object of the right type. So this is just a line that creates an order, a generic order of the right type. And this is how you might have wanted to do it, but again, this one gives errors, so we have to use reflection to do it this way. Okay, so we can use a generic controller, or we can create order controller specifically, and we have that all set up. So this is all shown in the textbook and in code in the textbook, but we're going to try to play with this some. So let's go to the assignment. First, we're going to create an order object so we can use it and set the order's name and product amount here. So again, this implementation, in data model, there's something called an order here with a GUI ID, product, and an amount. So we're going to create our own product here. So in order controller, we're just going to do that. We're going to specify an order. And I'm just going to call it ord and say new order, so this will call a constructor. And then once I have that ord set up, I can say ord dot things like product, set the product name. Right now it's nearing Christmas season while I'm recording this, so I'm going to order candy canes as my product to set that up. And I can set up an order amount. Ord dot amount, and set that how many. I want 100 candy canes here. So again, we can set up our order. So now we have our order set up. We can also set up the ID. I'm just going to skip over that because we're not really using that here. So we've got our order set up. Now we can use that to, let's say we want to write that. And we're going to try out with these different objects here. So we can create a single controller, and we can call single dot, and I look at the objects, and there's a create order that writes the order to the database. I can create, and it's going to need an order. I have an order now that I've created it, and I'm set to go. So this will create the order and write it to the database. So now if I run this, I can see the printouts are kind of follow how it works. So now it ran, it said creating separate services, creating a single service, and here CRUD save, saving entity, create order, saving order of candy canes. So it kind of tries to show that we're in CRUD and we're creating this. Oh, I noticed I kind of did this in the wrong spot, so let's go back because I was looking at the printouts and the printouts weren't quite right. I want to separate this, so let's go back. I want the order. I want to create the order here before. Oops, stop this. I'm going to move this code up before this. So I'm going to put this code up here. So create my orders, and now I'm going to first use this separate one and create my orders using separate services. This will create one service for creating orders, one service for saving orders, one service for one object for deleting orders. So now this would be a little better printout. So if I run this, okay, so this makes sense. I'm just doing the separate services now. It's calling saver to save the entity, and it's calling create order to save the order of candy cane. So I can kind of follow the printouts here, but I can also follow along with this code. What I want to do, let's stop this and see. I want you to list out the methods in the different classes that are called by create order, separate create order. So one way of doing that is I can put in a breakpoint here. So if I click way over here, I'll set a breakpoint here, and then I can kind of follow along. I could just follow along with code. Well, let's do that first, and then do the breakpoint. So I can see here it's calling create separate services. I can right click on that and say go to definition, and I'll go down below in the same file and say create here and create that. And then I'm calling create order here, and then I can go and find that. Go to the definition of that, and it'll be in the order controller class and be called create order. And now create order will call the saver method here, and I can go find the definition of that. But that goes through an interface, and it gets kind of lost here, so it's hard for me to see what interface is what is actually done, because in order controller, when I construct it, I pass in a saver, and I use that to call it. So following code is sometimes kind of hard there, just jumping around. So let's try this. Let's put a breakpoint and do it that way also. So I'm going to right click on this left click on that far right line here, set a breakpoint. So click turns on and off breakpoints, and now I can start this up again. It'll run to this breakpoint, and then I can use these things. So step into or step over lines that I don't want to, I just want it to run that line, I can step over. So I just wanted to do that printout. It'll do that printout. Now it's calling this method. I want to go to that method and see what it is. So I'm going to do step into. It'll go to this method, and then I'm going to do step over here, and it's creating these different things. And it's returning this order controller. So I'm just going to step over that, and then I'll return back to that first method I was at. So I just did this. Now I'm going to go down to this create order, and I'm going to step into that, see what that does. So again, now I'm in order controller, and I'm at the create order method, and I want to see where this save goes. I'm going to step over this. I'm at the bracket right now. Step over that. Now I'm going to step into this line here, and so now I'm in the saver one, saver.save entity, and I can step over this and see what's happening here. And now I'm back here, And so again, I want to keep track and write down what those are. So again, I started in the main program here, the class program and running main. So I'm going to keep track of that. I'm in program and ran main. And then in main, I ran, I was in the order controller and I ran create separate services. So I was an order controller and I ran, maybe I'm not too concerned of the format you use to specify this, just let me know which ones you run. And I ran this create separate services. Well, actually, create separate services is in the main here, and it returns to me an order controller. So that's actually in. Oops, let me pause this for a second. Okay, so it was actually in the in program, and it was called create order control services. And so again, I want you to keep track of these as you're probably stepping through these. So again, I'm going to stop this and run this again. And see. So originally I'm here, and again I can step over that. Now I'm going to step into this and see where I'm at. So again, here I'm in create separate services inside the program class. So program class create separate services here. And then I can go through these classes, and here I'm just calling constructors here to create these. So I'm going to skip over those constructors and not worry about the constructors. You want to specify the constructors in your list of what's being called when, that's fine, but I'm not going to require it. And then here I'm going to call create order, and it's in the order controller. So I'm in order controller, and I'm calling create order. And then in there, step over that. Where is this save method called? I'm going to step into that so we can see. So now I'm in the saver class, and I'm calling the save method. So now I'm in the, maybe I'll do a little tabbing here. I'm in the saver class and running the save method. And so I want you to keep track of this for this set, and turn those in, and then do it for a couple others. So let's look what else you need to do. So again, we added the SEP one and did that. We want to do the same thing when we create a single order. So again, going back to my main program, we created this for using separate methods, and now we're going to call this and use the single method, or the single controller object we created up here, and again call create order, create order, and pass in our order, do the same thing again, and follow this. And again, you can track this along using breakpoints. We have printouts in almost all of the methods, so you can also look here and if you're trying to follow the code, you can look here and see where this is being printed out. So these are just printouts that are being printed out too. So you can also look at the printouts if you have trouble tracking the code. So again, we're doing that. Do that with SEP order, sing order, and the generic controller. We're going to do the same thing. And again, they'll all follow similar paths to the code, but slightly different depending on how they work. So some of them will have different objects that implement the interface. So we'll go to an object and then go to like save, and other ones will have one object that we'll go to and then we'll go to save. So you'll see some different paths to the same methods that we use here. Okay, so do this for the generic one also. So again, you can just, similar to what we've done here, call create order using this generic controller here. Should work very similar to the other ones as we go. So that'll take care of these three things. Now the generic controller can do other things. So we're going to have you create also an item and instantiate the item for that. Now, we're going to look at two things. How hard is it to use the generic controller for items, and then what would we have to do to modify the order controller for items? So I'll walk you through these a little bit. So let's look at the generic controller for items. So we're going to go in our code. Now, so far we've created an order, and now we have data models for items and orders. So here's an item, here's an order. They're two different objects, kind of similar. So we want to just create an item and use that instead, as long as an order. So up here where we did an order, I want to also create an item. And track a little different information for items. So again, it's Christmas, so my item's going to be a candy cane. And it's going to cost $1.99. That's a kind of expensive candy cane. So I create an item called IDM, and I set its product and its cost. So now I want to try to use that item with a generic controller here. So here and again, so you added this code here to create orders, or in here it's called create entity with this, but you added this in here, and we're going to use the same kind of code. In fact, I'm going to copy this and just duplicate this to work with items. So I'm going to create a generic item. So I just have to use a different name. So there's my generic item controller. I'm going to use that. And again, when I create it, I want to make sure I specify that I'm going to create this so it can rework with items. And then I'm going to pass my item in there as we go. Now, it's calling create generic service down below here. And this returns an order. So we do have to redo this little program here to handle items. So our generic part only goes down this far. But again, I can just duplicate this one method and set up a similar method that returns an item. So in this new create item controller, for example, I'm going to just change all the order objects here to items, so it will create items. Now in this reflection thing that appears quite a few times there, see if I get them all. Returning, oh no, that's in the comment. I really don't need that. In fact, I can just delete that comment stuff. Okay, so I've got this set up. Oh, I've got to change this. I changed the type here. I changed the name over here. Create generic item services. So now I'm going to call that method up here in my main program. So I was calling create generic service. I'm going to call it create generic item service, because create generic service was doing an order object here. Now we could do some more parameterization here, but again, we don't do too much parameterization, so I'm going to try to skip some of that out and just leave with what the textbook has here. So again, to get this item to work, we had to change this one method that created all of our all of our objects we needed, and wanted to specify the right type for them and set them all up in our controller and return that type of generic controller here up here so we could use it. And once we have that set up, we can create an entity here. So again, it requires some changes of code here. We had a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines of code with this method. 7, 8 lines of code here to set this up. So it created a little more work, but it wasn't too bad. So that's what I want you to describe here, is how that's set up. And then I want you to do this other part, is what would we have to do if we wanted to redo the order controller for items? So this is our last thing. And this just shows the power of a generic controller. So in order to get this to work, if we're using an order controller, we have to go to the order controller method and use that as a sample for creating an item controller class. So I have to go out here and find, where is it, the order controller method here. Since it's here, I'm just going to create a new class here. Add a new class. Sorry if you couldn't see that. I was just adding a class, and let's call this an item controller. I'm going to go in the order controller and basically copy everything, all the code for this, and put that in here. But I want to have it set up for items. So rather than having orders, I want to have items here. So again, there's couple ways of doing. If your database, if your interface, you want it to work with different types of objects, you can use those generic templated ones, or you can do it specifically like this order or item controller. But again, if you're going to change this making these non-generic ones work for different objects requires a lot more cutting and pasting and redoing all of your types to match. It's not overly you can do it in a bit, but it just requires all this coding in here. Now let's see, why is it? So item is defined up in models, so I have to make sure I set that up with using models here. So I'm going to take one of these and follow the suggestion to say using models up above. It'll put using models up here, and set that up. Similarly, I want to say the using CRUD interface. In fact, I could just grab from order controller these two usings and use those over here, but now I've got those over here. So now I think everything's set up to be using items. So again, I had to create a brand new class, set that up, and then go into the main program, create a new static method called item controller. So again, go into your main method, the main program, and where we have a, let's see which one I want, an item controller, like static for creating an item controller. This can be done with either a separate or the single service. So just grab one of these objects here, like this one, and copy paste this and change this, or so it returns an item controller and creates a CRUD with items, and sets this up. So copy paste this, see if you can do that, and then you need to call that from the main program, and pass in the item. So like up here where we created a single service as an order controller, you want to do the same thing for an item controller and call that. So I can go through that process, and I want you to describe, that code, how much code you had to change. I don't need the details. I just need you to understand that its generic controllers are nice because it let us jump between items and orders relatively easily with just a handful of code things, where this is a more complicated change. Okay, then the last thing I have is a couple of questions from the textbook. So just go in the textbook and find the definition of interface segregation and these other things and submit those. So submit the list of methods up here along with the answers to these questions.